the coordinator for I'm the coordinator for the Virginia chapter of American Promise, and we're really happy that you're joining us this evening. And we're particularly happy because we have an interesting cast of characters in terms of sponsors. Certainly, we have the VAOurWay, my colleague, and Heidi Dreisig, and also Citizens United Action Fund and Let American Vote. My name is Nancy Morgan, and as I said, I'm the coordinator of the Virginia chapter of American Promise. Over the next hour, we're going to examine take a look at what's happening in terms of money and politics, what's happening, the ins and outs of the Virginia General Assembly. Heidi's going to give us an overview. We're going to take a look at what's happening in terms of opportunities, in terms of policies nationally and in Virginia. And finally, what can you as citizens of Virginia do to make your voice matter? So just what is American Promise? It's sort of a strange name, right? But it's unique in the democracy reform space, a cross-partisan nonprofit organization to empower citizens' advocacy to pass a constitutional amendment to get big money out of politics. As you may remember, we have over 40 years of Supreme Court rulings that have said money is speech. We're going to examine that. And then we would be remiss, of course, in Virginia if we didn't actually acknowledge in our pay-to-play state that we have the laxest campaign finance laws in the country. And so why should we care about money in politics? Well, because we, the people, not money, super PACs or corporations govern. And I just want to show you this graph, and it's like, whoa, what a blowout in terms of 2020. You know, the final cost of our elections in 2020, which were both presidential and congressional, was $14 billion. And when you look at that, it's interesting because you look at the various races and you can see how state races have become nationalized. And you look at the cost of the congressional races, for example, in Georgia, which were $500 million, South Carolina, North Carolina, Ohio, Arizona. You even had poor Maine that was sitting there. Look at Maine. How many people live in Maine? It was $200 million. And that actually encouraged a lot of activism in terms of citizens saying, we're tired of having out-of-state money coming into our election. And one of the issues which comes out in this election is the amount of money in independent expenditures that is spent on elections. Independent expenditures are expenditures that are not coordinated with individual campaigns. Rather, they are super PACs. Super PACs actually, in terms of disclosure, have to disclose to the Federal Elections Committee. And then you have the 501c3s that are sort of the gray money, the dark money. And if you look at overall in terms of these races, you had probably a record amount of nationally $4 billion in terms of undisclosed donations and ads. And then you also in these local elections, you have the same thing. So certainly in this time, our discussion today is certainly relevant in terms of here we are in Virginia coming off of the most expensive race in Virginia history. And we have interesting things going on and nationally in terms of opportunities to pass election and looking at, let's see what we can do in Virginia in terms of, we can't do a lot about nationally. We can work with other groups to pass legislation nationally and also a constitutional amendment. But let's also in Virginia, what we can pay, we can support. So I just want to say, campaign finance isn't really a sexy issue. It goes back 30 years in Virginia, where there was a Wilder Commission, where he said in 1994, they had a commission saying we need to put limits on campaign finance. 30 years later, we have nothing. And the national scene, we've gone through 40 years of Supreme Court ruling all the way back to Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976, where they said basically that you can't limit expenditures. For all of people say, all we need to do is limit expenditures like they do in Canada or the UK. It's a Supreme Court ruling that we cannot do that. And what does this mean in terms of the impact of all this money in our elections are on our individual lives. Well, I think that a lot of you in the room can find yourself in this circle, whether it's our energy policies in Virginia and Dominion, climate change, spiraling drug prices, dysfunctional healthcare system, mass incarceration in private prisons. GEO is giving money. We have a private prison here in Virginia, and there is money going into legislators' pockets. Nursing home care, broadband access. I worked for 20 years in the UN, and before that I did 7 years in Africa, and I care about good governance, I care about food security, I care about poverty, and even those programs are impacted in terms of the impact on money on our politics. So what I'd like to do is stop sharing my screen, and I'd like to ask Drew to show a short video on why should we care about money in politics?
Drew.
Drew, there's no sound.
$1 billion. America, we have a big problem with big money in politics. In 2020, over $14 billion was spent on elections, more than double the amount spent in 2016. And since 90% of those contributions came from just 300 wealthy donors, the voices of 330 million Americans were drowned out. The enormous financial influence wielded by special interests obstructs progress, leaving the survival of our democracy dependent on Americans to act now. American Promise exists to empower, inspire, and organize Americans to pass a constitutional amendment to end unlimited money in our elections and return our government back to we the people. And it's already happening, from Alaska to Maine, and all points in between, from living rooms to boardrooms, from city halls to state houses. Americans are coming together to renew the promise of human liberty, equality, and a true representative government. Together, we can eliminate the special interest influence in our elections. Together, we can hold our elected officials accountable. Together, we can build a government of the American people, for the American people. Are you ready to make history? Join the movement. Join the fight. Join American Promise.
Thanks, Drew.
453.
That was it started off sort of dark, but actually I think it ended with a powerful message that we the people have a responsibility to take action. And when you look at some of the issues, I'd just like to ask my friend, colleague, Heidi. Heidi, why do you care about money in politics? Where is Heidi? Heidi is probably in her car. She was driving from New York someplace, but she's the executive director. And
nope, Heidi's there. Hold on, we got to unmute her.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, sorry. I think there was a control to keep me from unmuting myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Heidi Droshak from VAOurWay. Nancy, to answer your question, I think for a lot of us, this is about buying influence and about knowing that, understanding that the right people are having influence and money isn't doing that. A personal example, one that I care about a lot, is the Dominion example. A lot of you, if you're familiar with Virginia politics, this is probably nothing new. But Dominion Energy continues to be one of the largest contributors to campaigns in the state and did so in the last election cycle. This is despite the fact that they are a publicly regulated utility, and they decide things like what you pay for your electricity bill and what our rates are and what our energy diversity looks like between clean energy and old energy sources. So limiting factors like that, I think, is really important, especially when we're considering who is making decisions and then who's funding those people who's making decisions.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I mean, there is a lot of anger about Dominion. One of my issues is, as just internationally looking at the United States, we have the highest drug prices among the industrialized countries, and the lowest health comes in among the same countries. And when I look at what's happening, whether you call it the Build Back Better Act, the spending bill, or the reconciliation bill, which are all the same, it's all of a sudden, when you look at the amount of money that the pharmaceutical company has just spent over the last 6 months in terms of influencing, they have the proposal to allow Medicare, like Medicaid, to regulate drug prices, and all of a sudden it's like 20. When you look at the numbers, it's just mind-boggling. They spent 23 million just over 9 months, and they have 1,600 lobbyists, which are 3 times the number of people in Congress, and $26 million has gone into just undisclosed ads over the last 3 months. So I just look at this and I think Americans are losing out in terms of public policy. I think when you look at the last Virginia legislature, there was Lee Carter had a really great bill to limit the cost of insulin prices. The amount of money that was being used to lobby our legislators, and Virginia has the most lax legislature on campaign finance in the country, it was just shocking, and it's to the detriment of the American people. So hey, I'd really like Audrey, after this discussion, can you just do a quick poll of what our audience thinks about money and politics?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just launched a poll. Let me know if everyone can see it. And then once I see most people or a quorum of people have voted, I'll end it.
It looks like a lot of people aren't voting. There's only 13 people. I can't vote, I guess, because I'm a co-hoster, but
Yeah, it actually looks like we have almost 80% of people who have voted so far. And it's looking like everyone has said yes, that big money in our elections is a critical issue. So if you're one of the last few people, make sure to get your vote in, but so far 80% has already voted, which is great.
yeah, this is great. I don't think this is a random sample, to be honest. I think people are sort of the people who self-select participating in this. But we are, just to let you know, we're working with the Wasson Center for Christopher Newport News to do a state survey on campaign finance, which will be a randomized sample. So we'll really, at the end of this month or beginning of December, we'll find out what Virginians really feel about money and politics. 90% of Americans, irrespective of party, believe that there's too much money in politics, including 87% of businesses, which is a surprise. So let's find out from Audrey. Let's do another just quick poll. What do I care about prescription drugs? Heidi cares about Dominion. What do you care about? This is the first Audrey, okay.
Yep, should just pop up.
And if there are other issues that folks want to add, feel free to throw it in the chat.
So what does it look like, Audrey? That's interesting.
Yeah, so it looks like about 70% of people have voted. So if you're one of the last few, make sure to get your vote in. But it looks like out of everyone, it looks like clean energy and climate change, about 70% of the respondents feel like that is one of their main issues. And then we had a couple other people vote for mass incarceration in private prisons. And then the other one tied with that was the rising cost of drugs and pharmaceuticals. I do see a few others in the chat. Sensible gun safety, absolutely. And then Dennis, yeah, about every issue is connected to money in politics. That is a very true and very, very good point.
Yeah, and so now what I'd like to do is pass the proverbial microphone over to Heidi, who's going to talk about what's happening in the General Assembly, to give us a brief overview of what's, it's sort of the ins and outs of the General Assembly.
Thanks, Nancy. Can everybody see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, so just to give a little bit of context here, we're obviously talking about campaign finance reform. For those of you that may or may not know, the Virginia General Assembly, which is the Virginia legislature, is meeting starting in January. So if you're interested in this, if you're interested in the fight, if you're interested in getting involved, we wanted to kind of lay some of the groundwork and kind of explain the context in which this discussion will happen over the next couple of months. I did start super elementary because I wasn't sure how familiar people would be. So I do apologize if for some of this is a repeat, but I'll just kind of run through it. And yeah, hopefully you'll come out of it with a little bit of an understanding again of what this arena looks like. So again, for those of you that are brand new to the system, the Virginia General Assembly is the Virginia legislature. Fun fact, it's the oldest continuous lawmaking body in the Western Hemisphere. A lot of history here in Virginia. There are two bodies within the General Assembly. There's the Senate, which is made up of 40 senators. Those senators are elected every 4 years. They make $18,000 a year. We do have what is considered a part-time legislature, and it currently has a Democratic majority, 21-19 split. The House of Delegates is the other body. It's made up of 100 delegates. Those are elected every 2 years. We just had an election this fall. That resulted in what is likely to be a Republican majority 52-48 split. There are 2 recounts underway, so it may be a 50-50 split, but it's looking more and more likely that there will be a Republican majority in the House. And they make $17,640 a year, again, considered part-time legislators. So we have 140 legislators here in Virginia. Again, they will meet starting on January 12th. It is a 60-day session, so there are long and short years. I always mess this up, in even years, which will be next year, we have what's considered a long session, which means it will take 60 days. Gosh, thank God it doesn't take 60 years. It will take 60 days. In odd numbered years, so this past year, we had a 30-day session. So again, very small amount of the year that's actually going to legislating. But interesting fact to keep in mind is this year, and the reason why even numbered years are longer is because they are budget years. So this is the budget from 2021. It's a little bit different now, but the state of Virginia allocates a roughly $70 to $80 billion every year, every 2 years, and those decisions get readdressed every 2 years. As you can imagine, a large chunk of that is kind of already pre-allocated, but most of the decisions about where the budget goes do happen on these even numbered years. And so that's why this upcoming session is especially important. A couple of dates to keep in mind as you're kind of framing your activism and thinking about how you might want to get involved. On December 16th is when the governor will propose his budget. This will be the outgoing governor. So Ralph Northam will propose his budget. He basically sends a budget to the General Assembly and says, hey, this is what I think you should do. Then January 12th, as I mentioned, is when the session will start. On January 15th, so 3 days thereafter, we will have the inauguration. So that's when our new governor will get sworn in, along with, I believe, the new members of the House. Then it happens super fast. The first 30 days, any new legislation has to be discussed and make it through at least one House. So even though we have a 60-day cycle, on February 15th, if a piece of legislation hasn't made it through at least one of the houses, either the House of Delegates or the Senate, it essentially dies. So February 15th is considered crossover, and that's a very important day because even though the legislative cycle will continue for 30 more days, anything that's going to make it through the General Assembly has to have already been voted on at that point. Again, then you have 30 more days when everything flips and it goes to the other chamber, and then the whole process basically repeats itself until the session ends on March 12th. This is too much text on one slide, but I like to explain it this way, which is a little bit more basic, which is basically the funnel that legislation goes through when it goes through the Virginia General Assembly. We actually start at the bottom. So this is, Nancy, for example, went to legislators and said, I'd like to see campaign finance reform on the docket this year. And so she gets what's called a patron. And she gets one legislator or a group of legislators who say, we're going to introduce this. This is our bill. Then the leadership will take that bill and put it into a corresponding committee, which will then put it into a corresponding subcommittee. And so that's the very first place that a bill is heard. Subcommittees are very small. They can be anywhere from, I think, 3 to 6 members. And that's where a very small group of legislators will discuss the idea and then vote it out of the subcommittee. And I will say, as we go up this triangle, at any point, if someone kills the bill, it's dead. So even if the subcommittee is only 3 legislators, if they don't approve the bill, it never makes it to the full floor, which is kind of weird. But they do, because they deal with so many pieces of legislation, they have to kind of prioritize. Assuming it passes, it goes from the subcommittee to the full committee. Again, this is just a larger committee, but it's also issue specific. Then if the committee passes it along, they basically vote for it, then it goes to the full body of the House. So that, again, would be all of the House of Delegates or all of the senators who then vote on the bill. Assuming it passes, like I said, then past crossover, it switches, it goes to the other House. So let's say a bill makes it all the way through the Senate. On February 15th, it will then move to the House of Delegates, keep it straight, and then work its way up this triangle all over again. So then it would go back to a subcommittee, have to make it through a subcommittee, have to make it through a full committee. And then all of that, once it makes it through both houses, will then go to the governor. And as you can imagine, in some ways, this is really great because there's lots of, socialization of bills and lots of time for people to discuss it, but it also means there's lots of points at which a bill can actually die. Couple other things to keep in mind. When we're talking about influence and actually advocating for bills, one thing that I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we do have a split General Assembly, 1 Republican House, 1 Democratic House. So the Commonwealth Caucus is likely going to have a lot of influence this year as a bipartisan caucus with members from both sides of the aisle. You also always want to be targeting committee members. So, specifically for this issue or for any issue, if it's going to go through a specific committee, like the P&E committee, Privileges and Elections Committee, you want to be figuring out exactly who sits on that committee, because they're the ones who are going to be doing the initial votes. Again, patrons, this is figured out way early in the process, but a lot of times patrons can be the biggest champion for a bill. So if you're really interested in pushing for a piece of legislation, reaching out to the patron and saying, how can I support this? Who should I be reaching out to? Where do you need support? Can be especially helpful. And like I said, another thing to keep in mind on budget years is that at the end of the day, everything comes down to money. And so legislators are always going to want to know, what's the fiscal impact? How, do we need to set aside budget allocations? And so, again, in this context, we're actually talking about overseeing money rather than giving it away to something. But when you're thinking about advocacy, you always want to be thinking about the budget implications. And then one thing I just wanted to mention at the end, again, is we're thinking about being advocates and getting involved in legislation, a couple of resources to keep on top of it. Virginia Legislative Information System, also known as LIS, is a great way to follow what's happening at the General Assembly. They also have the Code of Virginia. So LIS will track what's in the queue, like what's being considered. And then the Code of Virginia is everything that has already passed in years past. And then VPAP, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, is also a great way. They pull together a lot of this information and make it really easy to digest. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but again, hopefully that gives you a broader idea of the Virginia legislature and how some of this advocacy may fit into the picture.
Thanks, Heidi. That was a great overview. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I have a question, because now that we're switching from a Democratic House to a Republican House, how do the setup of the committees? As you know, all of our campaign finance bills go in through the Privileges Elections Committee, either in the Senate or it would go through the subcommittee in the House. When do they decide the makeup of these committees so we know how to advocate with legislators?
Yeah, so to Nancy's point, every 2 years, if there is a leadership change, the membership of committees can change, and especially the leadership within committees changes. In the House, which is the only place we're going to see committee changes, in the Senate, everything will remain the same because there was no elections. In the House, the Republican leadership may announce general committee assignments, but I don't think they're formalized until the first day of the legislature. So somebody may want to correct me if that's wrong, but I don't think we will have a definitive answer until the first day of the session.
Oh, am I frozen? Is she frozen or am I frozen?
I think everybody's back.
Okay. Heidi's back too. And I just want to say, and thank you, Dennis. It's interesting because she has already provided us the link through the Virginia grassroots group of legislation that has already been submitted. So apparently, you know, the bills are being submitted now. I do believe that there's a pre-filing date that I heard was November 29th. So if advocacy groups are working with patrons to get sort of a lock-in of a bill in the legislative process, it's good to get it in by that pre-filing date. Is that right? I'm asking Heidi, who is muted.
Oh, am I frozen? I'm sorry. You guys weren't frozen, but if I was frozen, I apologize. You're asking just when the best time to get bills in is. So again, there is a pre-file deadline. This is kind of depends on who you ask. You definitely want to get bills in as early as possible because that gives the staff the time to draft them, and it gives legislators the time to actually work with other legislators to garner support. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that, to be honest, a lot happens in the first 2 weeks of session. So there is, I think the 15th of January is technically the last day to do to submit bills, and then I think it's something like the 21st. They have like a 1 to 2 week period where you can still submit bills, and I will say a lot happens in that first 2 weeks. So again, if you know exactly what you're going for, like I know Nancy has been doing, and we've been working on a lot of for months now to get some of this legislation drafted, you really want to start as early as possible. But sometimes if you really have, you know, a sexy issue or something that, you know, you can really convince somebody to get on your side, you can technically get it submitted as, I think, late as the second week of session.
Okay, thanks. I think what we're going to do is switch to our next session. I'm going to go to Chris from End Citizens United, and we're going to look at this session. Basically looks at what are the options for making for reform, and we'll start off with the national level in terms of what's happening with bills in Congress that are related to campaign finance. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I'm happy to get the chance to discuss the Freedom to Vote Act with all of you here. So the Freedom to Vote Act is a compromise democracy reform bill that was drafted by Senators Manchin, Schumer, Klobuchar, Warnock, and several other key senators. While this is a compromise bill, that's based off of the For the People Act. There are some significant improvements from the For the People Act. And simply put, this would be the most comprehensive democracy reform bill that we've seen since Watergate. So the Freedom to Vote Act is divided into 3 separate sections. The first section is voter access and election administration. The second is election integrity and preventing election subversion. And then finally, the third section relates to money in politics, civic participation, and democracy innovation. So while today's session is about money in politics, we at End Citizens United, Let America Vote find it to be really important to make sure it's understood that these issues are really tied together. The same dark money forces that we discuss on getting big money out of politics are the same groups that are pushing the voter suppression bills across the country. They're the same groups that have been spreading the big lie to promote these sham audits we're seeing in states like Arizona. So it's really important to realize that this bill, these issues are so interconnected. For that reason, I will do a quick very quick overview of the first two sections before diving in a little deeper into the money and politics provisions. So the first section being voter access. There's a bunch of things. Most of them were included in For the People Act. It requires that every state allow automatic voter registration at DMVs. It requires online voter registration. It allows for same-day registration everywhere. It also strengthens voter roll maintenance, so people won't be wrongfully purged from the voter rolls. It makes casting your ballot easier, requiring early voting 15 consecutive days, requiring no excuse absentee voting everywhere, and ensuring access to drop boxes. It makes Election Day a federal holiday. It ensures adequate and efficient polling stations. So there's a provision that requires that every voter be able to cast their ballot within 30 minutes, which addresses some of those super long, hours-long lines that we've seen in states like Georgia and Texas. It also allows for uniform voter verification. So some states that have really strict voter ID laws, it requires a multitude of ways to verify your identity when casting a ballot, and not just strict voter ID provisions. It also creates a statutory right to vote. So it creates stronger judicial remedies when states make it harder for people to vote. It includes voting rights restoration, an issue really important in Virginia for individuals who have been impacted by the justice system. And it expands access to individuals with disabilities, military voters who are overseas, Native American voters, and other underserved communities. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket, which wasn't included in the For the People Act and is largely in response to a lot of the election subversion and election sabotage we saw in the wake of the 2020 election. So in this part of the bill, it places restrictions on states being able to remove local election officials from their jobs just for doing their jobs. It increases protections against election official intimidation and harassment, which is in response to the widespread intimidation and harassment we've seen local and state level election officials experience since 2020. And in response to these audits we've seen across the country, it requires the protection of election records, the protection of election infrastructure, and ensuring nonpartisan ballot tabulation. It also requires, for voter security purposes, requires paper ballots, reliable audits, and makes improvements to election infrastructure. Also includes a program to recruit nonpartisan election workers, which is crucial to ensuring that our elections are fair and free. And then finally, it increases protections against foreign influence in our elections. So that's the second bucket. The third bucket, it hits more on the money and politics issues. But the third bucket also, one other provision is it bans partisan gerrymandering and creates specific criteria for congressional districts, which obviously is crucially important right now as we're seeing extreme partisan and racial gerrymandering occur across the country. Now getting to the money and politics provisions. The first part of the bill is related to the Disclose Act, which has been introduced several times over the last decade. The Disclose Act bans dark money and creates more transparency in our election spending. So in order to do this, it requires super PACs, 501c4 groups, and other organizations spending money in elections to disclose donors who have given $10,000 or more. And it also shuts down the use of transfers between organizations that are often used to cloak the identity of contributors. And another important issue, it also requires donor disclosure for spending on judicial nominees. Another part of the Disclose Act is that it closes loopholes for foreign spending, including ballot measures and referenda. And that's crucial right now, as I don't know if you've seen in the news, but recently the FEC issued a statement that allows for foreign spending in ballot initiatives. So this would overturn that recent recent ruling by the FEC. And the final part of the Disclose Act is it requires nonprofit organizations that engage in political activity, like donating to candidates and purchasing political ads, to provide the IRS with the names and basic information of donors who contribute more than $5,000. So this is a really important provision to stamp out charitable fraud and other spending shenanigans. Next, the bill stops the illicit use of super PAC coordination. So it creates this new category called the coordinated spender category that ensures that single candidate super PACs do not operate as arms of a campaign. So right now, campaigns are basically able to use the system to let their super PAC that are not supposed to be coordinated at all act as basically a separate arm. This would change that. It would also ban federal candidates and office holders from fundraising for super PACs. So really important provisions for for decreasing the influence of super PACs on our politics. Next, it increases transparency in political ads. So this is the Honest Ads Act that's been introduced separately as well. This ensures that political ads that are online have the same transparency and disclosure requirements as the ads we see on TV, radio, and satellite airing. So right now, digital ads are basically, we're at the whim of social media platforms to require disclosure. This changes that. It makes the spending in those sort of ads the same disclosure requirements as TV and radio ads. The Honest Ads Act also takes steps to prevent foreign influence on online advertising, which, as we saw in 2016 and beyond, it's been a major issue. For the Freedom to Vote Act also brings the teeth back to the FEC. So right now, if basically the way the FEC works is campaigns can report violations of campaign finance laws. And currently, the general counsel of the FEC presents the FEC commissioners with their recommendation on whether there's reason to believe that a violation has occurred. Right now, 4 FEC commissioners are required to vote yes to proceed to investigate campaign finance violations. That's 4 out of 6. And right now there are 3 Democrat and 3 Republican commissioners. So the onus is on one person to flip sides in order to give the possibility for the general counsel office to investigate campaign finance violations. The way the Freedom to Vote Act changes that is that when the general counsel office makes a recommendation that there is reason to believe that the law has been broken, there need to be 4 votes to shut down the investigation. So this will give the FEC and the general counsel's office much more teeth to actually enforce our campaign finance laws. Next, an exciting provision of the bill is the State Election Assistance and Democracy Innovation Fund. So what this provision does is it establishes a self-sustaining fund to finance investments in election infrastructure or other innovative democracy project. The fund is not financed through taxpayer money. It is financed through assessments paid on federal fines, penalties, and settlements for certain tax crimes and corporate malfeasance. So states have an allotted amount of money that they will get through this fund, and they can decide what they want to do to make their elections better and improve election infrastructure or other democracy initiatives. 2 options that states can have with this fund is allows states to enact a small donor matching program using their democracy credits. So in this situation, qualifying House candidates would receive a 6-to-1 match for qualified small donor contributions up to $200. So it's a great way to empower small donors and to encourage congressional candidates to listen to regular people instead of big money spenders. Another provision that can be used through the Democracy Innovation Fund is a democracy credit program. So this credit, under this program, every qualified voter who requests a democracy credit will receive one $25 credit per election cycle. And that can be doled out to federal House candidates in increments of $5. So another way to empower small dollar donors and give regular Americans a bigger voice in our democracy. So that's the basis, the three separate parts of the Freedom to Vote Act. I know it's a lot. It's a giant bill. It's a great bill. So the status of the bill right now, we are continuing to keep the pressure on Congress to pass this bill as it continues its Build Back Better negotiations. As I said at the beginning, Joe Manchin helped create this bill. He has said himself that inaction on voting rights is not an option. And he's had a chance to try to get 10 Republicans on board to get this bill across the finish line. But at this point, he hasn't had luck. We're just repeating the refrain that Senate procedure cannot get in the way of protecting the right to vote and getting big and dark money out of politics. Recently, we've seen senators who have historically been opposed to any sort of filibuster reform, such as Senator Angus King in Maine, Senator Tom Carper, Senator Mark Warner. They've all come out loudly in favor of a carve out to get the Freedom to Vote Act across the finish line. Leader Schumer just this week issued a Dear Colleague letter focused on the Freedom to Vote Act, as well as the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and emphasized how important it is to get this bill passed as soon as possible in order to protect the 2022 elections and beyond. So thank you for your time in discussing this bill. Happy to answer any questions when we have the Q&A at the end.
Thanks, Chris. That was really great. And it's interesting because it's basically disclosure. I think, except for trying to make the Federal Elections Committee get out of its rigor mortis role. I think that everybody was really upset when they came out with that ruling on the foreign money, especially in Maine, where the Canadians are actually putting all this money into their ballot initiative on it. So I think that these are all really great entry points. What I just like to say is one issue that is missing is basically disclosure. States can have some states have great disclosure laws. Disclosure, the precedent in the Supreme Court, and they had a ruling under Citizens United 8-1 saying, yes, they actually support disclosure. So actually, but the issue is with the Supreme Court is on spending. And I think that one of the things that it may be, people think, oh, we're overly optimistic, but we really feel like an American promise that we need to have a constitutional amendment that allows Congress and the states to, again, resume their constitutional right to regulate election spending. And that goes back to overturning Buckley versus Vallejo in 1972. And when you look at the history of our nation, the pathway of our history of civil rights has been forged through state activism. And you had people power related to the reversal of 8 harmful Supreme Court decisions. When you look back at certainly in the Reconstruction area, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, you had the progressive area earlier in the 1900s where you had, the passing the 16th Amendment, which allowed the federal income tax. You had the 17th Amendment that allowed us to elect our senators. Certainly you had the 19th Amendment which allowed women to vote, which is 100 years old. And finally, during the civil rights area, that was the time when we had really the last substantive campaign, the amendment, the 26th Amendment that allowed, lowered the voting age to 18. So we're really hoping, we've got Virginia, we passed a resolution in the General Assembly saying they expressed appreciation for the need for the constitutional amendment. We need to get people activated in the states. We've to to push for a constitutional amendment. So American Promise, their goal is to have an amendment ratification by July 4th, 2026. Our goal in Virginia is, hey, we were the last state to ratify the ERA. We will be the first to ratify this amendment to get money out of politics. But just turning to Virginia, it's like, okay, you know, we had Citizens United and 22 states had to pass to adjust their campaign finance laws because of campaign finance, the Citizens United. Not Virginia, because Virginia is one of only 5 states which has no limits on campaign contributions. You know, it has no restriction on personal use of campaign funds, which we are one of 2 states. So if you are running, if you're in the General Assembly and you want to spend your campaign money on going to Paris for a vacation or paying your mortgage or your child's school tuition, that's fine. So, you know, you look at, just looking at the cost of Virginia election, it mirrors the escalation, the trend in national. 121 million spent in the last of 2019, which was the House of Delegates and the Senate. 20% of that came from out of state. But this year, I just checked BPAP, the governor's race in 2017 was 67 million. And I just checked, and they have the spending for the governor's race was 105. I was betting it would end up at 90 or something, but no, this was 105. So obviously we have no restrictions, we have no regulations. This is the time, I think, and I really think that everybody's sort of fed up because even the Republicans, up with all the money from the left, when you look at who's, you know, Dominion giving money, but Clean Virginia is giving 3 times as much. So let's just take a look at the Virginia graveyard of campaign finance bills. And this goes back 30 years to the Wilder Commission report in 1994, where they recommended campaign limitations and ethics reform. And since then, you know, every year there's probably about 10 bills that are introduced and 10 bills that die. It's like, I always say, it's sort of like the movie Groundhog's Day. It's like sometimes it's even with the same vote, if they vote on it. So let's just review last year. You know, you had limits on contribution, Chap Peterson in the Senate, it died. It always dies with the same vote. There was the Public Service Corporation. You know, people say that Dominion shouldn't be allowed to give money to campaign contributions. There were 2 bills. Chap Peterson, it dies with the same bill dies with the vote. It's like really seriously Groundhog's Day. And then last year it died in the House too. Banning corporate contributions. 22 states ban corporate contributions. The federal government has banned corporate contributions since 1907. So Delegate Lee Carter introduced it. It's not an extreme bill, and we testified, a lot of our group testified, Dominion and Appalachian Power testified against it. And the thing that was so egregious about this one was that Sam Razul at the end of the discussion said, okay, let's see, made the motion for a vote. There was no second, so there was no vote. So first of all, it's disrespectful to invite us to testify on this if you're not even going to have a vote. It's just an example of how democracy dies in darkness. And then there's the restricting personal use of campaign contributions, which has been introduced like for 6 years. Finally, it got a hearing. It passed the House of Delegates 100-0. And then it goes to the Senate, stumbles out of the Privileges Election Committee, and then this weird thing on the Senate floor where they're rewriting the bill, and then they send it back to the subcommittee that was finished for the year. So that died. The one thing that did pass, which was surprising, was David Bolova said, let's set up a joint subcommittee to study comprehensive campaign finance reform. So that passed, even though it was sort of not clear in the Senate that it was going to pass. But so that passed, and I'll make a mention on that in when we're looking at what we expect from bills for this year. And then we actually did get a resolution appreciating the need for a constitutional amendment, because we could only get appreciating a commemorative resolution, because in the Senate, the Rules Committee doesn't allow actually them to discuss substantive resolutions recommending change at the federal level. So when you look at just Virginia in terms of our lack of good governance, in terms of ethics and transparency and accountability, it is quite interesting that we rank 46 on the Swamp Index with the Coalition for Integrity. This is 2020 index of rating, cross-state ratings. And if you'll look, we have Virginia's 46, we have Utah, Michigan, Arizona, Idaho, and Wyoming. So, you know, we keep sort of mentioning that, hoping to shame our legislators into action. So where are we now in terms of, is there really an appetite for reform in Virginia? Well, I mean, on the constitutional amendments stuff, nationally, we do have resolutions in both the House and the Senate. We had strong support in the 116th session. We had 222 representatives who supported a constitutional amendment, and 49 senators, including Warner and Kane. So we're trying to get that moving. And Virginia, you know, we did get that resolution passed. And just, okay, what are we looking at for this year? There was a subcommittee for campaign finance that met, had 4 meetings over the August, and they had to have the last meeting by October 1st. You know, we testified at all of them. They spent half of their time writing this bill, this personal use bill, which I thought was sort of strange. But we did have possible agreement that we really need to strengthen the institutional capacity of the Board of Elections. They are totally incapable. There was, you know, they don't have the resources, financial or staffing, to implement any bills. The Honest Ads bill, that was a bill that was introduced and passed, but there's no capacity to monitor it. So there's an agreement that, yeah, we need to write a bill, and we found a couple potential champions. Deed might be interested, Bulova might be interested, possibly Republicans will be interested. Hopefully these will be presented to they had the first meeting of the bipartisan caucus. We're hoping that really of an issue that is of bipartisan interest, it's campaign finance, a bill restricting personal use of contributions that will pass. Improving disclosure is really important, because some of the issues that mentioned, the Chris issues, we can implement that in Virginia. For example, on independent expenditures, we're having a meeting with the Campaign Legal Center with a couple legislators saying, okay, just let's introduce improved regulation and reporting by independent expenditures, and filling in some of the gaps which exist in terms of disclosure, including perhaps, I mean, VPAP was mentioned. VPAP does wonderful analysis, but we think it's totally inappropriate that Virginia is one of the few states that the Board of Elections has no public disclosure system that they have set up, rather that it's outsourced to a private entity. So those are some of the things we do have some interest in. Limitations. We've drafted some best practices on limitations drawing from other states. Public financing of elections and limitations are a perfect example of being introduced together to really create a dynamic environment for getting people running for office who represent their local community. Marcus Simon did have one a couple of years ago, and then he rise for interdiction in local communities. Probably won't get that far, but that's what we're looking right now. So that's what's happening in Virginia. What I'd like to do now is, it's almost 6:30, but I'd like to do some quick a roundtable of what we can do, what can be done to make a difference. Can we go back to Chris, or perhaps Audrey, or somebody from the campaign, from the End Citizens United, on what we can do to push for the Freedom to Vote Act?
Yeah, we're going to hand it over to Drew on our team, who will talk about ways to plug in with End Citizens United and Let America Vote.
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, and really informative time, at least for me, as not a Virginian, on how in-depth all of this is. So thank you all so much for taking the time. So my name is Drew. I'm the digital organizing director here at End Citizens United and Let America Vote. The main ways that we have to get involved, as always, the one thing you hear most is phone banks, and that's one of the main things that we run on our end. So what we do on our phone banks is we reach out to voters in our priority states and our high priority states. And we work to talk to voters there, primarily in West Virginia and in Arizona right now, because as you can imagine, those are very high priority. Call Democratic voters in those states, talk to them about the Freedom to Vote Act, which they've probably heard about by now. And then if they support the bill, very simple ask, we just transfer them directly through to their senator's office so that they can ask them to move quickly to pass the bill and not let Senate procedures and rules and arcane loopholes get in the way of passing the bills that we need to get passed. Like I said, really easy calls and extremely high impact. Every single person that you're transferring through, that's another either staffer who's taking down their name or another message on that answering machine. Really big impact. And I think Audrey's going to drop a link in the chat. If not, we'll get a link in there for you can sign up. But we'd really encourage you to either join one of our phone banks. We've also partnered with a lot of grassroots organizations that have actually just created their own little phone banks, so that, you know, whether you're in a room together now, socially distanced or vaccinated or however you're doing it, or even remotely, we're, you know, happy to coordinate with you so that you can have a group of your friends together and fellow activists all working together to do this extremely meaningful work to get plugged in. We do have other opportunities that you can use to get involved. We do a lot of texting, but we've got a lot of capacity in that area. But we also do other various volunteer events periodically. We have kind of bi-weekly, we have a bi-weekly lunch and learn series, which is on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. We have our lunch and learn where folks can come together and just learn about you know, recent updates with the bill, you know, recent updates with events that are going on across the country. We try to get some fun and exciting special guests to join us on those events as well, and just where you can kind of get a lay of the land and find other ways that you can get involved. Immediately after that, we segue into another phone bank, and then on alternate Thursdays we also do we have Thursday evening events that are a bit more informal, where we, you know, also get updates on the bill, but then just talk about different ways that we can talk about the issue with our friends, whether that's you know, how we can organically bring that up in conversation, or you know, if you're in when you see opportunities, maybe it's on social media or things like that, just finding different ways that we can work this issue in. Passing this bill, we're so close to the end, and as one of our colleagues has to say, we're winning and we're going to win, but it's going to take a steady drumbeat, a steady push on multiple fronts to get us there. So I really hope that you can that you'll be able to join us for any of those. We've got some links in the chat that you can sign up. I will also drop my email in the chat as well if you want to reach out to me directly about, you know, any questions you may have, or about setting up you know, setting up maybe a group phone bank. My email is drew@ncitizensunited.org. I'll put that in the chat as well. Yeah, we would absolutely love to have you in this fight with us here on this last big push. Thank y'all.
Thanks, Drew. And just from our perspective, from our group, we need your voice. That's what we need. And we need to get people who are from outside of Northern Virginia. Just in the subcommittee, I remember Tommy Norman saying, hey, you know, this seems like a Northern Virginia issue. And some people say, my constituents don't care about this. So we've had over 50 meetings with legislators. We've advocated it testified in the subcommittee meetings. If you're from a district and you want to help us organize a meeting with your legislator, that would be great. We're trying to get pledges. I don't like getting pledges here. You can see Byron Conley, of course, signed pledges. Just saying, you know, it's like the Josh Stanfield saying you know, not taking money from Dominion, but we need to have our legislators commit to issues. or do media engagement. If you like to write letters to the editor, that's great. If you don't, I'll ghost write a letter and you just tell me your local newspaper and we can put it in. Community outreach, building relationships, building partners. And one interesting thing that I think that that is if you're in an area and you're interested in getting a local resolution passed, before in 2012, Alexandria Falls Church, Arlington, and Charlottesville all passed resolutions saying they wanted to get money out of politics and have a constitutional amendment. I just got in the legislative priorities. I'm hoping that Alexandria will put it in as a legislative priorities. I think this is a way of really engaging in local politics. This is not a partisan issue on a local level. Most people agree with it and try to get into the legislative agenda, whether it's Loudoun County, whether it's Madison County. Let's try to, if you're interested in doing that, we're willing to work with you. So anyway, we just need your voice. I put my email in the chat. So if you're interested in participating and exploring opportunities on how you can raise your voice, just send me an email. Thanks. And I'm going to turn it over to Heidi for the last word.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks everyone. I guess I will end it on a broader tone. That was a lot of information and probably an overwhelming amount of options. I know that if I was coming into this brand new, that probably would be enough to scare me away. Not in a bad way. They're all wonderful options, but if you're really just dipping your toes and you're really interested in these issues, but you don't really know where to start, what I would suggest is just following one or all of the organizations that are here tonight. You know, we do a lot of the work in the background, so you don't have to. I will say specifically in Virginia, this is going to move very fast, and it's, you know, my ask for today would be different than my ask a month from now, and it will definitely be different, you know, on January 12th when the legislative session starts. And so, you know, if you follow organizations like VAOurWay and Money Out VA, sorry, Nancy, and Citizens United, you know, again, we're sending out the notices. We'll tell you when to call. We'll tell you when to get involved. I know there was a great list of items that you can do in the chat, but, you know, again, just a great starting place is to just kind of follow along and start to educate yourself, because eventually you'll find ways to plug in. So thanks, everyone. And yeah, thank you for the interest in this issue. I think it's very important, and it's nice to see a bunch of people together caring about this.
Okay, well, thanks, Jessica. I don't see any questions in the chat, but do you want to put in a last word for Citizens United?
Sure, I would be happy to. Want to thank everyone who gave up a chunk of their Thursday evening to join us tonight and learn a little bit about sort of the political lay of the land in Virginia and nationally as it relates to campaign finance reform. This is such an important issue that connects to all the other issues that we care about, like climate and common sense gun laws and the price of prescription drugs. And we hope that you will continue to work with us, continue to work with Big Money Out and Virginia Our Way moving forward to make real reform. Hope everyone has a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Bye.